welcome back. It is time now for The World This Week, our regular look back at the week's events. We'll be heading to Athens, to Debaltseve, and back to Paris, where the French government this week saw off a no-confidence vote. Also, we'll be looking at the story that's made so many waves on social media, where Parisians got a very unpleasant taste of English football hooliganism and racism. I'm joined this evening by a panel of journalists. Catherine Field, who's an independent journalist, joins us tonight, as does Sylvie Kaufmann, editorial director of Le Monde and a columnist, contributing writer at the New York Times. Thank you for being with us. With us as well, Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, columnist for the Sunday Telegraph and a regular guest here, as is Bernard Guetta, who's a commentator on foreign relations at France Inter and a columnist at Libération. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. We're going to begin with Greece, since that is where the news is coming from this week. Very sketchy details so far, but it is believed, according to officials, that a draft text that could form the basis for an agreement to extend Athens' bailout package has been agreed. And Elisabeth, if it proves to be, as what we're hearing suggests, the beginning of some sort of agreement and the end of the squabbling, in particular between Berlin and Athens, then this would be an extraordinary series of events this evening, and much more than had been expected.
It will be, if it happens, it will have been a very interesting game of chicken, because it was all a question of being believable in saying, if you do not give me a minimum of this or that, I'm breaking everything down, which was where Varoufakis had the advantage over Mrs. Merkel. We don't know yet whether they've reached an agreement. It's not Greece, the country, that's bankrupt. It's Greece, the government, that's bankrupt. The country actually has money. The country has got 20% of its actual wealth in the hands of the Orthodox Church. There are various ways in which things can be done. I don't know, how many shibboleths they want to break. It's not impossible, but I have no crystal ball. I don't believe in those. Crossing fingers.
Bernard Guetta, it was brought down to, analysts said, over the course of the last week, a sort of showdown between two men, Wolfgang Schäuble on one side.
Well, it was a negotiation. And it's always like that during a negotiation. But the success, because there will be a success, I would say, the success of this negotiation today, this afternoon, doesn't come as a surprise, because the price would have been too high. For
everyone involved.
For everyone. For the other countries of the Eurozone, and for Greece, obviously. And so they had to reach a compromise, and they will.
It seemed, as the week wore on, Catherine Field, that the Greeks seemed to be getting the upper hand.
I'm not sure they were getting the upper hand. Perhaps they were reading the messages from Berlin a little clearer than they have been. And I think it's been interesting in this round in particular. We've had less of the German bashing that we had, if you recall, a couple of years ago. We had some very nasty things said about Chancellor Angela Merkel, which really poisoned the atmosphere for a while. And not just against Angela Merkel, but against the Germans. And I think it was about a month ago, we had some really nasty rhetoric about, well, look how much Germany owed Europe at the end of the Second World War. And I think that everything's been toned down a bit in the last couple of days, but there's still a long way to go. Don't forget, this particular package has to go before several parliaments. It just doesn't go through on a nod. It has to go before the Finnish parliament, the Dutch parliament, and the German Bundestag. So we're a long way from seeing this particular deal being signed off on.
I suppose, Sylvie Kaufmann, what's happened tonight is that after so many weeks, well, ever since the Greek election, actually, of seeing no room for manoeuvre, no possibility of a breakthrough, this glimmer of hope this evening is something that everyone will latch onto. The alternative, as has been suggested, was simply too catastrophic for everyone, which was a Greek pullout.
Yeah, well, as Bernard said, that's a negotiation, so you always have to live from a position of strength, and then, leave room for compromise and negotiation. But this is Europe, and in the end, there's always compromise. At whose cost? That's the question. What I find interesting is that the one, now the Europe is so big that the compromise is mostly seen as at the expense of in this present situation of Greece, because Greece would be the one with the biggest cost to bear if it had to leave. You know, it's of course nobody wants Greece to leave the Eurozone, and indeed Angela Merkel and François Hollande again said today they really want Greece to stay. Actually, the Greek themselves, the Greek government itself said that they didn't want to leave. So then, you know, you have to find some common ground, and there's still a week to go before the final deadline. So, you know, as you say, there will still be probably some drama, but I'm quite confident that they will reach a deal. And actually, the investors seem to be confident that they will reach a deal. So that's usually a good barometer.
One of the key questions, and Elisabeth Moutet, as we see what draft agreement has been reached in Brussels today, will be the question of, clearly what Athens were asking for was an extension of the loan part, which to the Germans seemed far too easy. The key question is whether the extension of the bailout that what we're hearing could follow from this agreement, whether the other Eurozone finance ministers have managed to tag on to that, the idea of spending cuts and the kind of things that Berlin's been asking Athens to do.
It's yes and no. I mean, they've been asking for those spending cuts, and the Greeks have said that they had the spending cuts, and they kept on hiring civil servants. They've been asked by the IMF and various bodies in Europe for those, and they did not comply. So there was this sort of myth and no result. I think that if the stock market is still doing fine, it's because actually Greece is not a very large economy. So that I think the loss, if the negotiation should break down, the loss has already been taken into account on the markets. I think that's why the markets are in the state they're in. What's worrying the Europeans is not so much the question of Greece, it's the domino effect. If what happens to other economies, what happens to not so much Italy, because most of Italy's debt is actually in the hands of Italian savers. So that's much more stable than the country's accounts would make it look like. But in a country like Spain, Portugal, possibly even Ireland, that's a problem.
And on that question of the wider implications, do you feel, when you look at this, Bernard Guetta, that over the course of the long term, given the level of the challenges, given the threats posed by a number of different countries with regard to this issue, that the Eurozone can actually find a way out of this mess?
It has to, because in any way, the entire Eurozone has to reach a new compromise between, let's say, Germany and France, between two necessities. First, to invest in growth, and second, to pursue the reducing of the public debts. And now there is an evolution in Berlin, there is an evolution in Paris, and I would say that the Greek case is only a part of this much bigger negotiation between the partners of the Eurozone.
Well, on that question of Paris, another of the big topics of the week has been what's happened here in France, this extraordinarily bloody, or it's looked as though it was going to be bloody, parliamentary battle. Well, it wasn't terribly bloody, but it was unexpected. I think even the French government hadn't quite seen it coming, hence this sort of growing tension over the course of Tuesday and in the end, the pushing through of the Macron law by decree. On the point that you make, Bernard, and I'd like to put this to you, Catherine, the battle that took place in the French Parliament today is also a part of this story, is it not? It is Paris trying to go down the road of the sorts of reforms that Brussels needed to go down, as it's asked for from Athens and from Rome.
Well, I would pull you up on that. The reforms that went through the French Parliament were really meagre. And I think, all we're looking at really is Sunday opening, a competition for people to be able to travel around France by bus, which they have been doing in many other European countries for many decades.
15 Sundays.
Precisely.
15 Sundays.
When you look at them, Sylvie Kaufmann, they are, from the outside, remarkably timid reforms. Yes. There is nothing revolutionary. It's not going to change the way the French operate. It's not going to change France terribly much. And yet, it took this extraordinary parliamentary measure for the government to get these fairly timid reforms through. It seems from the outside absolutely extraordinary.
Yes, well, France is a special country and has a reputation for being particularly difficult to reform. But yes, there are far far smaller those reforms than what Italy or Spain have experienced. France is not exactly in the same situation as those countries were either. But I agree. I mean, these are timid reforms by the standards that Germany expected or Brussels expected. Yet this is on the right path, if you want. What happens is that this is not the reforms that François Hollande campaigned on almost 3 years ago.
His position has shifted substantially.
Well, I think my interpretation is that he knew that that would be the road he would have to go, but he wouldn't be elected on that. So neither Sarkozy nor him nor François Hollande campaigned on the truth.
So rather than being a convert, he was a closet liberal.
So yeah, he had a kind of left-wing campaign, but he knew that at some stage he would have to go on a different path. And of course, his majority has problems with this. His party has problems with this, and he had a hard time selling it to the left wing. Actually, he didn't manage to sell it to the left wing of his party, hence the drama. But, you know, this measure that was taken is, of course, an exceptional measure. I mean, to get the law through by decree, kind of decree, rather than when you're not sure you're going to have a majority vote. But this has been used before in the French, it's a constitutional measure. It's legal, and it's been used before, not in the past few years, but before
It does, however, Bernard, not bode well for the government's ability to get further reforms through. And the point I was making about the similarities between Paris and Athens and Rome was simply that the government finds itself caught between the demands of Brussels about the fact that it gets its budget straight.
It's not the demands of Brussels. It's the demands of all the European countries or all the countries of the Eurozone. That's a common agreement.
A common agreement, but it finds itself caught between that agreement and a parliament and a population behind it that are reluctant.
Well, every population is reluctant to austerity. It's normal. You're reluctant toward austerity, and I am. That's a natural reflex, but that's also a necessity. And so everywhere there is a fight, a contradiction, at least between the necessity and the aspirations of the people. And Sylvie just said that France is a very particular country, but it's also a very happy country. After all, we don't have the same situation as in Spain or Italy. Even the economic situation in France is much better than in many other countries of the Eurozone. And so the people in France don't understand, and really they don't, the necessity of this kind of measure.
Because it hasn't been properly explained.
They don't feel the necessity of that, because just look at the situation on the street, not only in Paris but also in Marseille or Lille. This is not a poor country. This is not a country on the brink. Thank you. Of a failure. Not at all. Not at all.
On the ground, Catherine, it's true, out in the streets it doesn't feel as it is. When you look at its books, though.
When you look at the books, when you look at particularly the books for the health service in France, France has got a wonderful health service, but heck, it costs a lot of money. You look at the pension pot, there's not going to be a lot of money there when we all get to the age when we're going down to the social security and say, we want pension, we want the money back that we put into the system. It isn't good. And I think the other thing we've seen this week is something we've seen in Europe a lot with left-wing governments. It's all very well to be in opposition, and when you get into power and when you've got to make some really tough decisions about the budgets, about how money is going to be spent, you can't always make those nice decisions that all the money goes to the good left-wing causes, that sometimes you've actually got to listen to the business community and say, yes, this is what's going to be done.
This is not only left-wing governments. The previous right-wing government was a big spender, big spender. So it's, yeah.
Well, first, I'd like to take issue with several things. First of all, there have been polls that say that 60% of the French supported the Roi Macron. So a great deal of this is posturing.
There is a disconnect in France between what the Parliament's done this week and the people that it represents.
And so this is where you think that there's a way of, you know, getting your bills through Parliament, and obviously it was not the right way. So that's one thing. I would also take issue with the idea that the French are happy, because every time you have international polls on the happiness index, you have countries like Liberia and Sierra Leone where people declare themselves happier than the French.
The French like to mutter.
More optimistic.
We have a serious morale problem in this country, and that's also something. But we also have, we spend 57% of our GDP on public spending. This is 10% more than most countries and in the Eurozone. That's, I mean, it's not even Brussels telling us to do this. Common sense should tell us that we cannot go on spending like this, because, quite frankly, there's no money in the till. And we are living on credit, and our children will have to pay for that credit. And we are extremely happy right now, because there are countries that have worse accounts than ours in the short term. We have those incredibly low interest rates, and already the servicing the interest of the French debt is higher. The total intake of the French income tax. But the minute interest rates start going up, then we are done for. So it's not a question of, you can't do this with the French. I think some frank speaking would have been accepted, but we have a president who decided that he could go on managing the country the way he managed the Socialist Party. So bringing everybody together on a compromise that makes nobody happy. And we have seen the result this week.
We're going to take a quick break there. We'll be back in a couple of minutes, though, for the second part of tonight's debate. I think we need...